WCLN 1170 Radio and Cable Channel 16 are pleased to present We Should Know, hosted by J.W. Simmons, an upbeat, informative look at people, places, and issues facing our community. This education-based analysis of issues will remain positive and informative as we consider closely what we should know.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We Should Know is on the air. I'm your host, J.W. Simmons. We're talking about firearms today, everything from what that means in today's world to the safety issues that now we're questioning as it relates to firearms, handguns, and other weapons. And we're talking with someone that's been on before, Thompson. Thank you for coming back. I want to remind folks who you are and what you're involved in. Right now, you are retired from the state of North Carolina. You are the owner of CMT Consulting, LLC, which just simply means it's a private company. And you teach extensively to law enforcement people in various capacities, particularly everything from instructor training, that is how to teach firearms training, to you also deal with this carry and conceal law. You're very familiar with the changes that has now occurred, even in the purchasing of a handgun. One of the most prevalent issues is this whole issue of safety as it relates to the public. So we've got a huge baggage of information here to unfold and to unload. And I want to thank you for coming back talking to us.
Thank you for having me.
Okay. Let's start, Chad, with just some kind of interesting things here. And I read this from some of the things that you've put out there. And I think this is pretty true, but I'm going to ask you to kind of fill me in on it. It says you're living the dream as a full-time firearms instructor and professional shooter. Now, here's my question. Where did this passion that you have, and clearly it's a passion, for firearms and for teaching and for handling and for expertise, did that come at an early age? Was there somebody that was your mentor? Kind of help us understand that, because I think your story is going to be quite a bit more interesting than just what people see.
Well, I've always been natured that way, that I've always felt if something was worth doing at all, it was worth doing to the best of your ability. Not specific to firearms, but whatever I was doing. And early on in my law enforcement career, I had what I'll just say was a particularly enlightening experience when it came to firearms use. And I realized a couple of things. I realized that I was not as good as I thought I was when it came to actually pulling the trigger against another person. And I realized that I'd not been told the truth when I was taking basic firearms training in the basic law enforcement training program. And so that began my journey to be as good as I could be and to go out and teach law enforcement officers before they, quote unquote, have to face the elephant, that you need to have your skills on point. Your tactics need to be on point in order for you to go home to your family. And as a result of that, I got really, really good, and I got picked up and got sponsored on the USPSA pistol shooting circuit.
And a lot of these things that you are nationally recognized and internationally recognized accreditations as a firearms, somebody that can go on the range and actually demonstrate what you say.
As I've said before, talking the talk is one thing. You got to be able to walk the walk as well as talk the talk. Anybody can parrot something they heard from someone else in the past. If I have verified it, I've tested it myself, I go out and demonstrate it to my people well, it's two things, twofold really, to show them that I'm an actual expert and that if I can do it, they can do it as well. It just takes time and practice.
When you look at, from your perspective as a trainer, you see folks, maybe it's the first time they've ever really held a handgun. And you're actually teaching instructors to go out and teach these carry and conceal courses. And far as I know, some of these people are civilians. Maybe they're thinking about purchasing a gun. I want to kind of talk a bit about not only how the laws have changed as it relates to purchasing a gun, but how do you teach the instructors that are teaching these people to carry, conceal, to get them familiar with not only the handgun, but the safety issues, because it's a huge responsibility.
Yes, it is. And you're exactly correct. Teaching a citizen or a law enforcement officer, a brand new person that has never held a firearm before, teaching a handgun is the hardest of the three firearm systems out there. When we talk about small handheld firearms, we usually think of shotguns, rifles, and handguns. Most people with a minimal amount of training can hit accurately with a rifle or a shotgun. Most people cannot hit accurately with a handgun, and there are a myriad of issues that can be discussed there, but teaching a citizen or a new officer how to shoot it is one thing. Teaching these new trainers that have never taught anyone is something completely different, which is why I call it instructor training as opposed to instructoring. Instructor training to teach them, here's what you've got to do. What it boils down to is this. We need to be teaching people how to save their own life. And that's what it boils down to. Legal training, so paramount. Safety training, first and foremost. Marksmanship training, I would say, would be third in the tier levels. I'd say safety would be first, legal would be second, and marksmanship would be third.
The marksmanship piece interests me too, in the sense of the ability to use a handgun or any kind of weapon effectively becomes critical in today's society. The decision somehow is made, and help us understand the split-second kinds of things that folks go through in making that decision. Is there exercises that you do? I mean, sometimes people ask me, well, how do you even know that person's going to be able to pull the trigger? Well, it gets to a life or death situation. You better have already decided, or at least in your mind be locked in. How do you teach that?
And that's a part of it. That's the huge part of the legal training, to make people understand that the body can't go where the mind hasn't already gone before. They'll do what I call vapor lock, and now they're on the receiving end instead of the giving end. The citizens are good people, overwhelmingly good people. They would not jump through the hoops that the state says they got to jump through to obtain their concealed carry or go and whatever training they're trying to get if they weren't good people. But folks, I think it's television shows and movies. People think that stuff is real life, and it's not. Your life is decided in fractions of a second. One of the things that driving instructors will ask people is, what is the normal reaction time? And driving instructors have it more so than firearms instructors, because the majority of your firearms instructors are parroting what someone taught them in the past. And they'll say, recognized reaction time to a threat is a half second. And it's not true. And here's how I know it's not true. I'll ask people, what is the reaction time if a car pulls out in front of you and you're driving your vehicle? And I can tell you it's about 3/4 of a second. And then when people say, but I can pull the handgun out faster than I can do so and so, here's what I respond with. Did you drive here today?
That's right.
Will you drive home tonight? Did you drive yesterday? And when they say yes, when was the last time you were involved in a gun battle?
That's right.
Were you involved in a gunfight yesterday? What you're going to do faster is what you're accustomed to doing. Moving your foot from the gas to the brake is something you do habitually. If it takes 3/4 of a second to do that, it's going to take even longer to recognize a threat, respond with that handgun, get that handgun out. We're already behind the reactionary gap. We've got to make people realize that what you saw on a television show or in a movie is not real life. This is real life.
Because real life is not staged.
It is not.
Those are the kinds of things when you're teaching people that's going to teach other people. Do you have concerns, and in the sense of, well, did I really get that across, or is that particular person walking out the door, although this test said this? How do you deal with that psychological piece? Because you've taught what folks, I want folks to understand with this conversation, you've literally taught hundreds or thousands of people that are now out there, and they're carrying that message forward. What feeling do you have? I mean, that's pretty heavy weight.
Well, I'm going to back up and say that I did 7 to 8 specialized firearms instructor classes every year, which is around 100 to 115 people. I did 1 concealed carry handgun instructor every month, and there were 40 people in that class on an average, and then 2 of the private protective services classes every year. So it would be in the tens of thousands of instructors that I've trained. 15 years of my 34 law enforcement career were spent teaching at the Justice Academy. And I'm glad you asked that, because I've actually laid awake at night, had discussions with my significant other about, I wonder if these people, one, have their heart in the right place and really care about officers' lives, or if they just want a chest thump and say, look, I'm now a firearms instructor. And second, if they're really picking up what I'm putting down. And I sincerely hoped that the majority of them actually paid attention and went back and taught it correctly.
And I think what I'm hearing you say is that comes with the training you've done for these instructors, they got to be conscientious in what they're teaching and be able to use that same method of follow through. Is that person, did they get the core message, not only in their safety, but in the safety of everybody around them, and that reactionary thought mechanism? That's always kind of amazed me as well.
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. That's a good way to paraphrase it. I hope and I pray that the majority of them did. Most of them, I think, did. The impression that they left me with was that they were going to do it right. But every class that I taught, I asked people to nod their head to the affirmative if when they left that training, they would be the good instructor, is how I put it, and they would focus on saving people's lives.
As we look at not only North Carolina but nationally, we continue to see huge numbers of situations of shooting, very dramatic kinds of shooting situations. We see adolescent behavior involved in a lot of these things. I'm going to pose this question, and we might need to give you time to go through the break and come back and we'll talk more about it. But when you look at that and you see all of those kinds of things, do you see something that you could tell us that we should have done or we need to be doing to help curb the utilization of that handgun that ends up in a nefarious situation where something illegal has happened or some child has shot somebody else? I want you to talk to us about what we either should have done 10 years ago or 20 years ago, or what we should be doing now. And then we got about 30, 45 seconds to break. So I just, just kind of start a response to that, and we'll go to break and then we'll come back, because it's a pretty big question.
I don't know that there is anything else that needs to be done legally. For a number of years now, a couple of decades, North Carolina has had 14315.1, which is the storage of firearms to protect minors. And it simply says that if someone resides in the same residence as a minor, someone less than 18 years of age, and they leave that firearm accessible, and one of four things happens with it: the juvenile takes it to school, the juvenile commits a robbery with it, the juvenile threatens someone with it, or shoots someone with it, not in self-defense, then that person that left the firearm accessible can now be criminally charged as well.
Let's hold that thought, because I want to come back to juveniles and access to firearms in the second half, or second segment rather. Ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned. We're talking about something very important to you in today's society. That's the utilization, possession, ownership, or buying a handgun. We'll be back in a moment.
Providing fewer commutes, more backyard offices, and crystal clear meetings. Providing less, you froze up, and more presence in your presentations. Providing a better internet experience. Providing possible.
You're out for an evening on the town. Finally a chance to relax and forget that you left your front door completely unlocked. Fortunately, you just installed a security system from Star Communications. With just your cell phone, you can check on your house, lock it down, light it up, and get back to relaxing.
You forgot to put Buster in his crate.
Unfortunately, we can't help with that. Security and automation from Star Communications. Call today to find out more.
Most aging adults want to stay in their homes as long as possible. And as your loved ones get older, you want to support them, even when you can't be there. Star is proud to offer Star Alert. This new system is now mobile and has GPS compatibility, so your loved ones can live their lives and you can have peace of mind, knowing they can get the help they need with just the simple push of a button. The new Star Alert also offers automatic fall detection, so help will be alerted even if they can't press the button. Call and ask about Star Alert today.
Gentlemen, welcome back. We Should Know's on there. Coming up on our second segment here, we're talking with Chad Thompson, a well-known instructor of firearms in the state of North Carolina. Now, I should say, I guess, the proprietor of a private company, owner of CMT Consulting, LLC. You're all over everywhere now, and you're teaching community colleges, private protection classes, law enforcement classes, people to teach civilians. You're still doing a lot of that same kind of thing. So again, back to your words, you're living the dream. So as we look at that, Chad, we went to break. We were talking about children in the possession of firearms. and you just cited a statute that talks about that. Let's kind of, I'm going to allow you time to expand on that further, because I think that's one of the key issues that folks are literally concerned about, particularly if you look at public schools today. You know, there's things been set up that monitors if a weapon's on somebody, and spending hundreds of thousands of dollars to make sure there's nothing coming into school and that kind of thing. Kind of give us your thought on that, your candid thought on what's going on with that.
I don't think I have all the answers to today's society, but legally speaking, North Carolina has stepped up, a couple decades ago, and they passed 14315.1, and they said if you own a firearm, you have a legal responsibility to keep it away from children. And there's some specifics that go along with it, but if you live in the same residence, if you have a child that stays there with you, if you should reasonably expect that child to be home and you leave that firearm accessible, if they access it and commit one of 4 crimes with it, then the gun owner is also charged as well. And what makes it so tragic is, I know it's not as much as it was back in the day, but back in the day, it was usually that one child was playing with the firearm and injured themselves or someone else, or another child was killed. Today, more than we've had in my career, kids are bringing guns to school. And I don't know what the answer to that is, but if you look one state to the north in Virginia, a 6-year-old child shot a teacher in through the hand and into the chest with a 9mm pistol. Now, as of yesterday, the feds have indicted the mother because she admitted that she's an illicit marijuana user and that she purchased the firearm and lied on her Form 4473. But there all kinds of reports from the school system are coming out that the kid made verbal threats before that he was going to attack the teacher. He brought a live round of ammunition and dropped it on her desk to let her know that he was going to use that against her, and nobody did anything about it. And when she looks up, this 6-year-old has a gun pointed at her and pulls the trigger. Now, in her defense, she did put a hand up and tried to deflect it, but the round went through her hand into her chest. There's some conjecture now that if it hadn't slowed down enough going in and out her hand and wrist, that she probably would not be here right now. But regardless, studies have shown that she's probably going to have a shortened lifespan. It could be just a few years, or it could be exponentially shorter because she was shot in the upper torso. And it's tragic, and I'm not going to say I got the answers society-wide, but legally, I think North Carolina's done a pretty good job with passing what laws need to be passed.
And I think the other part of that is, as you teach people, and those people that you've taught, like that do civilian classes, they have a huge role in impressing in people's minds how important it is. It's like you don't drive a car on a sidewalk. There's certain things you don't do with a handgun, but yet when we see the car accident, we don't necessarily say, well, that car killed somebody. It's always the handgun's fault, as it is in many situations.
The media and politicians have come up with this term called gun violence when it's just violence and they happen to choose a gun. You can commit violence with anything out there. And you said it perfectly. Nobody says, that car jumped up and did so-and-so, but people will say that about a firearm. And you're exactly right. If it weren't for people mishandling them, doing stupid things with them, the gun would not get the bad rap that it's got today.
As an instructor, walk us through some of the changes that you've seen in the past year as it relates to firearms and the practical aspect, whether you agree that they were positive or maybe you think there should have been a different approach to it. And a lot of that in purchasing handguns.
The law change last month. We had a law change here, and the pistol purchase permit requirement is now a thing of the past. And that's a good thing. It started in 1919, and it was actually from the Jim Crow era. And it was the clerk of Superior Court originally was who citizens had to go to and get a pistol purchase permit. And then a few years later, it went to the sheriff's office. But it started out, the clerk of Superior Court had to grant people permission to buy a handgun. And it ends up that a lot of times it was being used to prevent minorities from purchasing and possessing handguns. So I think that's a good thing. We still have background checks. The NICS check is still required. A lot of misinformation was put out there, and when the pistol purchase permit program went away, people were flooding the gun shops thinking that meant they never had a background check. And I talked to one gun dealer in particular that said probably 3/4 of the people that day had been turned down because they had criminal convictions or domestic violence convictions, or they were prevented purchasers in some way, and they mistakenly thought it meant there was absolutely no background check done anymore. And it's not true. It's the same thing as purchasing a shotgun or a rifle now.
So everything now is checked as far as background, even if it's a shotgun or a rifle?
Everything in North Carolina, if it's purchased from a dealer, has to have the NICS check.
Wow. So it could end up being a plus kind of situation that maybe we can screen more people.
I think so.
How much does behavioral health have to do with this? You talked a bit about handguns in the wrong hands and all that kind of thing. Is there a behavioral health thread somewhere that we need to be recognizing that, of course, I grew up in a rural household, and we did something that's a lot of people don't talk about. We got familiar with guns in the woods hunting and safety things and all those kinds of things. Is just kind of was inbred into us. But a lot of people don't have that. I want to kind of talk about what we're missing socially, what we can do as individuals. Maybe it's not part of our family, but is there something we need to do? I know there's gun courses that are taught. The Wildlife Commission, Corpus Extension, and so forth has those kinds of things. Do we need to highlight those more?
I think so. As you said, when we came up, there were just as many guns then per capita as there are now. There were less people, but just as many people per capita owned guns back then, and you didn't have anywhere close to the number of violent incidents and accidents that we have now. I think it's important to say that the National Rifle Association and North Carolina Wildlife, entities like that are doing hunter safety stuff. They're doing what they call the Eddie Eagle program with NRA, and they're teaching children. But I want the parents and the caregivers out there to understand something. If you go back and look at the study, I believe it was Duke University did it a few years ago, and they broadcast it on a news program, but because of what it showed, it wasn't proliferated like it should have been. And what they did, they put a bunch of children in a room together to play, and they had some children that were parented by people who had exposed them to the Eddie Eagle program and had exposed these children to guns and told them, you don't touch these unless mom or dad are around. And some of the children had never been exposed to guns and no gun training at all. And they had a two-way mirror so that they could watch what was going on there. And two things that I took from that interested me. One was if a child found they had guns that were inert, they wouldn't hurt anyone, but they were real, except they wouldn't take real ammunition. If a child found that handgun that had been trained, that child would not touch it. And they would say, my mom and dad said, don't touch that without a parent being here. But here was the second thing that was really brought home to me. Just as soon as one of the uneducated children walked up and picked it up, that gave unspoken permission to the other child for me to play with it as well. And then even though the kid had been trained properly, when they saw another child pick it up and play with it, then they would start to play with it as well.
Wow.
What scared me the most about that incident is that those children at that tender age understood that the opposing thumbs are stronger than our fingers. And they would try to pull that trigger, and if they couldn't pull it with one finger, they'd try two fingers. And if they couldn't get it then, they would turn that gun around and put the thumbs on the trigger, which points the muzzle right in their face.
Just totally oblivious to the consequences.
I guess just metaphysically they understood this is how to make it go bang, but didn't realize it was going to go bang back into their face.
What's the future that you see, or just use your imagination down the road with firearms? Is there, because law enforcement has been using firearms or sidearms, I can remember back to 38 Model 10 and those kinds of things. So again, I'm showing my age, but when I look at that, are we progressing to some other form of physical control that weaponry like firearms is going to not be needed? Or is that going to be something that's in your mind 20 years, 30 years from now still there? Is there other things that in this escalation of force continuum that we all have heard so much about?
I think that's what society is trying to go to. but there's never going to be a time, in my opinion, that firearms are not going to be needed and necessary. If you look at in your career and my career, 34 years ago when I started, and even longer than that when you started, our force options were baton, hands-on, baton, and firearm.
Right.
And then they came out maybe, 35 years ago and said, we're going to introduce pepper spray into that now. And it was an attempt to not cause damage to a suspect and to help an officer not get injured struggling with a suspect. Then they went from pepper spray, they said, now we're going to have these electromuscular discharge weapons, the tasers. And all they're trying to do is avoid injuries to a suspect and avoid injuries to an officer. What it has ended up producing is officers who are afraid to go hands-on now. There are times when hands-on is much more desirable than spraying someone with pepper in a mixed environment in a room. Pepper spray is going to run everybody out of that room, as you well know. There are times that it'd be more desirable to go hands-on with someone than to use a taser. If there's traffic close by and they fall into traffic, there might be a myriad reasons that you wouldn't want to use the taser, but as a result of all this new equipment, officers are not as equipped to go hands-on like we were back in the day.
I want to, we're going to take a break in just a few seconds here, but I want to come back and talk a bit about the whole process of call it refreshing, and your career, I always heard it as recertifications. We see it in other emergency services areas like CPR and those kinds of things. You have to do a certain amount of recertification periodically. You do with firearms. Is there a significant change you see somewhere in the future? And we're going to talk about this in just a few seconds as it relates to recertifications and expectations on recertifications.
Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be back in a moment. We're talking about all things related to handguns, firearms, use of force, or use of deadly force with Chad Thompson. Stay tuned. We'll be back in a moment.
For the ultimate Wi-Fi experience, you need whole home Wi-Fi from Star Communications. Star's whole home Wi-Fi provides ultimate coverage, ultimate performance, and ultimate power all the time. Star's whole home Wi-Fi systems feature the latest Wi-Fi 6 technology and are equipped with unrivaled bandwidth and 4 times more simultaneous connections. So you can connect tons of devices throughout your home with no lag and no downtime. Plus, with 24/7 support and remote troubleshooting, you can rest assured that Star is always there to help you should any issues arise. Star's whole home Wi-Fi also comes with the Command IQ mobile app, putting you in control of your home network and making it easy to set up and connect devices, run network speed tests, pause Wi-Fi, and set parental controls all from the palm of your hand. It's the ultimate Wi-Fi experience. Contact Star today to get started.
Just because something may work doesn't mean it's right for your business. Let Star Communications' knowledgeable consultants help you customize a hosted voice system that's right for you. Our dedicated experts work with you to understand your business needs and guide you at every step, from choosing and installing services to ongoing maintenance and support. Contact Star today.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We Should Know is on the air. We're talking with Chad Thompson. I'm J.W. Simmons, your host. We look at this show, Chad, and we try to reach as many people as we can. Your expertise and background in the use of handguns, particularly as it relates for law enforcement, has a huge window to look out of because you've done a lot of training for law enforcement. And we were just alluding off air how that training has progressed over the years. For the average person out there, if you're a police officer or a sheriff's deputy or a law enforcement officer in North Carolina, you know there's been a lot of time that you put in decision making. There's a lot of time you put in the utilization of handguns. Tell us what a volume of training is involved in that and what the mandates that you've been involved in. Now with a private company, not only do you adhere to those mandates, but I'm sure you get called on sometimes by police chiefs and others and say, we want you to take this a little bit further.
Yes. People don't understand that it's not the way it used to be. As you and I said before, it is not just here's a gun, here's a badge, go out and do some good. We have constitutional law training, we have civil liability training, all kinds of training, de-escalation training before we get to the actual use of the firearm. And then just the shooting portion is at least 48 hours, just the shooting part, but myriad hours before then. Every year, what we call in-service continuing education, firearms training, legal update training, combat courses, or decision-making training is required every year of law enforcement. And if people think that it's easy, they should walk in those shoes. It's not easy for law enforcement, and it's even harder for citizens who don't have that level of training. So if an officer can make a mistake, and it does happen, look at how much more exponential the likelihood of a citizen making a mistake who is legally possessing or carrying a firearm.
Do you think we need to increase some sense of training or more training for civilians and in the area of safety as it relates to firearms, and not just the safety in using the firearm, but the safety in keeping control and locked up and those kinds of things?
I'm a big freedom person. I'm a big pro-Second Amendment person, and I do believe that our nation was founded on those tenets of freedom. With that being said, look at how inherently dangerous firearms are, handguns in particular. Now, our state says if you go to get a concealed carry permit, classes got to last at least 8 hours. They got to have at least 2 hours of legal training, et cetera, et cetera. But I still have instructors to call me and say things like, some of my students didn't show up. I'm having a hard time making the class last for 8 hours. And my response is, then turn in your instructor certification. Because the overwhelming majority of the people that we have as instructor or as students in a concealed carry class are novice gun handlers. They don't understand the amount of repetition that it takes before that reaction is a natural reaction. They don't understand how many mistakes can be made when it comes to the use of lethal force. Actual marksmanship fundamentals, not just getting lucky. And these people will see a television show, as I touched on earlier, or a movie, and they'll think that that's the truth. Remember when you and I were younger and Hawaii 5-0 was the big thing, and there was Jack Lord, with that perfectly coiffed hair, and he would pick somebody off a building 2 blocks away with that snub-nosed 38. People actually believe that that's real life, and that kind of stuff is just not, it's not accurate. It's far from the truth as you could think of. And what people need to do, if they've got one person in that class, you need to make that 8 hours up. If you say, well, I can't make it, then you teach them everything that you can about marksmanship, about what's going to happen to you metaphysically when you have to take someone's life. Absolute safety. There is no reason for the people to be accidentally injured today with a firearm, the number that we're having injured. We need to reduce that any way that we can.
And when people are put out there, I guess in your training instructors to teach these kinds of things, you're training them with that same kind of spirit and mentality of put enough in it and maintain it to make sure you get the message out, and then double check and make sure they got the message.
And what I start out with is this: safety is first, safety is central, and safety is last. I repeat safety 3 times. We start with safety, we focus on safety, and we end with safety, because they're inherently dangerous. They are used for self-preservation. Why should we allow them to be used for self-destruction? And people make mistakes. I understand that. We're humans. Even monkeys fall out of trees. I get that. But as an instructor, I've told people my entire career, if you ever let your guard down as pertains to safety, you will never reclaim your credibility. And that's an accurate statement.
When you look back at your career and what you're doing now as a private company, and you see a lot of these things happening in urban and rural areas where unsafe firearms is used in very nefarious ways, and there's a lot of effort. I mean, I've got to give it to a lot of the urban areas. They're putting a lot of effort in it, trying to get civilians involved in preventing a lot of these kinds of things. What do you see from your perspective as a law enforcement trainer trainer that's well known in your profession. What do you see and what do you say to folks? How do we curb this? How do we stop the gun violence? And you notice I just used the phrase gun violence. And even the way we address it is, are we addressing it verbally the wrong way? Do we need to look at it another way? I think it would be interesting to just hear from somebody that's done this and basically devoted their whole life to it.
Guns have two enemies, rust and politicians. And politicians will try to make hay with anything that they can. Have you heard the adage, if it bleeds, it leads? Mm-hmm. And anything involving a firearm is usually gross injury. It's usually could be death. And if it's accidental or intentional, people are going to try to make hay with that. We had just as many guns per capita, when you and I were children, as we have now, but we didn't have the number of violent incidents that we have. There's not one panacea, in my humble opinion. Now, gun owners do have a responsibility. I did an interview with a Cary police officer not too long ago, and the overwhelming majority of gun thefts in Cary were as a result of people leaving their vehicles unlocked at night with a handgun in the vehicle. Now, what happens with that gun? You know what happens. It goes on the street, it's on the black market now, and it's something nefarious is going to be done with it. We have a responsibility when we decide, I'm going to purchase this gun. I'm not going to say we need to pass another law, but you need to make that responsibility as a gun owner. I'm going to keep this handgun secure, this shotgun rifle secure. I'm going to make sure it's away from my children, my grandchildren, my nephews. I'm going to make sure that I don't enable some thug, some criminal out there to access this firearm and hurt someone else innocent.
That mentality is part of what we refer to, or what the governor refers to here, is a North Carolina SAFE program. And he talks about in this program, in fact, I think it was announced a few weeks back, but he talks about the importance of the safes, the things that you put into guns to keep them from firing, all of those kinds of things. When you look at that progression of things, what is a person that's seen as many handguns, handled as many handguns as you've done, what's the best thing to do with that handgun that you have and you've been trained to use, and you get to your house? What is the best thing to do with it? Where do you put it? Do you put it in a safe? Do you buy a unique safe to put it in? Do you take the ammunition out of it? Do you thread it so you can't get the ammunition in very quickly? You got to do something to unlock it. What do you do with that?
In my opinion, there are three answers to this question. If it is a firearm that you don't need, that you don't see any need to use for self-preservation, put it in a gun safe and lock it up. Put it in a gun safe and you have the combination, maybe your spouse has the combination, but the children don't have access to it. The second is one of those new biometric safes if it's in your bedroom and you might need it to defend yourself at night. If you're concerned about a home invasion, if you're concerned about a burglary and someone intending you and your significant other harm, the biometric ones either read the fingerprints or you set a code into it and you can access it much faster than a standard gun safe. Mm-hmm. But the preferable response for me is this: if it's a handgun, keep it on your body. Keep it in your pocket, in a holster. Keep it on your hip, in that holster, on your ankle, like my ankle gun, in a holster. It is impossible for a child to access that handgun now without you knowing it. Mm-hmm. Now I've got it if I need it, if I am attacked in my home, if I'm broken into, if I'm attempted a carjacking, if someone attempts to carjack me, I've got it, but a child can't get a hold of it and hurt themselves or someone else.
Is there a message somewhere in the sense of all these things we see going on, and it's just getting really unbelievable that you mentioned carjackings and other things that's happening. I've even had people look at me and go, I've reached a point that I'm a little bit afraid to even get out in society. I'm not talking at nighttime. I'm just talking just get out and interact. And I'm not, granted, some of these people are older people and that kind of thing. But it causes you pause when you think about it. Do I need to be prepared to respond at any time? Or am I better off to be passive and just say, okay, go ahead and take it, or if you want that, that's fine. We're in a society of kind of a little waffling back and forth. I grew up in the other society where you took charge of it and said, this ain't gonna happen here. You know what I'm saying?
I agree with what you're saying, and I think if we're not prepared, if we're not preparing, then I think we're preparing to fail. two things about the people. It might be older, might be younger, might be middle-aged that are concerned about today. I think it's warranted, and here's why. We have more people on earth today than we've ever had before, and we have more people out there with untreated mental illnesses today than we've ever had. Think about when you and I know when Dix Hill was open, Dorothea Dix, and it's closed now, and hundreds of, maybe thousands of facilities just like that. Those people who would be incarcerated at Dix Hill, Dorothea Dix back in the day, are now walking the streets. If they break into a car and they find access to that firearm, handgun, shotgun, or rifle, now someone's life is possibly in jeopardy.
I want to follow up with some of these things as we go to this last segment and kind of get some ideas in more detail where folks can go to get training, what is identified as legitimate training versus somebody just trying to sell you a handgun. I think it would be important for, at least for you, to kind of message to folks, these are some of the pathways you can look at to not only become more responsible, but to become more understanding of what handguns are for and what they should be used for. And then we'll go wherever you want to go with the rest of it, but that's kind of where I want to hit.
Okay.
So, ladies and gentlemen, we'll be back in a moment. We're going to be coming up on our last segment. We're talking with Chad Thompson, who is now the owner and operator of a private company that he possesses, and we'll talk more about that and what you need to know about handguns.
Eastern North Carolina is a beautiful place where we gladly choose to call home, and we strive to provide the best communications services. STAR is committed to improving communications to all our service areas because we want to improve the communities where we not only work, but also live. STAR Communications. We are neighbors serving neighbors.
If you run a business, you need sales. To get sales, you need customers. To get customers, you need exposure. Let our team of experts craft and produce the perfect video ad to reach your intended audience while making the most of your advertising dollars. Call 1-800-706-6538 or visit starcom.net to contact our Star Communications production team and get your business moving to the next level.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. I want to thank you for being with us today. We're coming up on our last segment. I want to remind you, you can reach us by simply emailing us at weshouldknowedu@gmail.com. weshouldknowedu@gmail.com. Also, if you want to drop us a postcard or a little message, you can do that. Just simply Post Office Box 1482, Clinton, North Carolina. Just address that to We Should Know, or just put something at the top. They'll get it in that box, and we'll try to respond to you. Oftentimes, folks will let us know shows that they'd like to hear from, people they would like to hear on the show, and content, subjects that you feel like you maybe need a little more information from. This is kind of the show today, and we're talking with Chad Thompson. Chad's got excellent background in not only teaching firearms, but understanding the capacity, capability, and functionality of law enforcement, and continues his legacy, should I say, as a private company in offering training throughout North Carolina. Chad, one of the things we've talked about today extensively is this whole idea of safety and what that means in the firearms community. And I want to kind of, before we get too far into this segment, I want to try to drill in a little bit to that whole idea of storing handguns, what is considered an unloaded handgun. I'll put a star beside that one, and how to keep some kind of lock device. You mentioned a while ago, you covered the idea of handguns being stolen out of cars, and we've seen where that happens, it seems like more regularly than not. As owners of handguns in North Carolina, is the responsibility held with the owner to store that properly? And if we have it in a safe, can we feel comfortable? Are we more vulnerable for break-ins if folks know we have a handgun? I've even had people to say, I don't want anybody to know I've got a handgun, because they'll try to figure out how to get it. I mean, we're literally in one of those uncharted waters.
Yes. If you make the decision to purchase a firearm and more handguns are being purchased now than shotguns or rifles. Specifically, if you make a decision to carry that handgun in a vehicle, to keep that handgun accessible, you have now forfeited the right to be careless. You have forfeited that right. You have to make sure that handgun is secure, kept away from unwanted hands, be it children or criminals. And people, in my opinion, leaving their vehicles unlocked is inexcusable. Leaving their guns accessible to anybody is inexcusable. We have had people who have gone to use a public restroom, have taken that handgun out, placed it on the back of the toilet, and walked out and left it there. Now, I may forget where I put my car keys. I may forget if I brought something I was going to need for work today, but in almost 35 years, I've never forgotten my handgun. People, if you make the decision that you're going to carry that handgun, purchase that handgun, you have now forfeited the right to be careless. All you have done is put other innocent lives in danger.
And I think that what comes along with that is the understanding of that, not only through training, but through media education. Is there not some part of that media has a responsibility to message what to do rather than just message what's wrong?
Absolutely. Well, you mentioned the new directive and initiative pushed by Governor Cooper. How many times have you seen the news media talk about it? I saw one blurb about, 6 seconds long, and that was it. Giving out free gun locks, especially in largely urban areas, mandating the safety training for people. I don't know if it's laziness or if it's ignorance, but people have got to step up. If you made the decision that I'm going to be armed, now you can't be careless.
And that casualness and not stepping up, as you allude to, results in a lot of these situations that is just tragic, and it continues to explode.
Absolutely. I've got a LinkedIn page. I don't do any social media because I believe social media is the devil. But I got a LinkedIn page and I've got a YouTube channel that people can contact me on or go to. And I try to do informational videos. I've got a video series on there for concealed carry permittees and concealed carry instructors. And I'm just trying to get the word out there to people and do what I can. Guns already, we touched on this, guns already get a bad rap, as it were. They don't need it to be any worse. And people that want to say, the country has a gun problem, let me say this. Estimated right now, studies have shown there's around 400 million guns in our country, more guns than there are people in our country. So if somebody could right now wave a magic wand and just do away with all gun sales right now, how many years into the future before all those guns are gone?
It's a good point, and really the realistic aspect of even trying to take those guns is just impossible.
Our Constitution says it's not going to happen, and I would hate for our government to ever cross that line, because if we think there was bloodshed in the atrocious Civil War in our nation, I think it would be a lot worse today.
Wow, that's a little bit scary within itself. But I think the passion for that constitutional right is really strong, and it's not just in the South, is it?
It is not. We're in the South, of course, but it's not just in the South. The constitutional scholars that read, the Bill of Rights, the first 10 articles or amendments, if you will. The first one, of course, is the most important. The second one is the one that keeps the rest of those in place.
What kind of, and again, you've been a trainer for years and retired as a firearms trainer. What courses, or are there courses that you would see that you'd like to see implemented for public consumption, not law enforcement, but for civilians? What are some of those courses, and how would you see those courses implemented?
First of all, for all the listeners, all the viewers, watchers out there, vet your instructors. Do some research. Don't somebody just pushed up some dirt somewhere, got a grant from something and called themselves a gun expert. Not necessarily make them a gun expert. I have said for I don't know how many years now, me standing in my garage does not make me a Ferrari. Me getting a certification does not make me qualified. Vet your instructor, make sure it's a good instructor, and at a bare minimum, even if you never intend to obtain a concealed carry permit, if you never intend to pursue that, take the North Carolina concealed carry handgun class. Take it from a good, reputable instructor. It's a great overall firearms class. It teaches you the laws in North Carolina instead of what's been passed down generation after generation in your families. And it teaches you about handguns, teaches you about other firearms as well. But the safety aspect of it is what I really like to push.
When you think about it, and I'm asking this question because I'm kind of imagining people listening to the show and they'd say, well, why didn't you ask him this? And I'm going to ask this question. If you had to recommend to a person, someone to come and said, Chad, tell me what kind of handgun I should get. I'm thinking about buying a handgun. I never owned a handgun. What should I get? What would you say to that person?
Well, it's ironic you asked that because that is the most common question I get from new gun
Let me
owners.
check that off. Okay, go ahead.
Most common question, and there's too many answers. There are way too many answers. I've got to ask what the primary intent of the handgun is. I've got to ask what their capabilities are. I've got to ask if they have a caliber preference. There's just too many answers to that question. If they intend to keep it in the vehicle, keep it in the home, if they intend to carry it on their body, et cetera, et cetera. And there are several different answers to that, but I can't just give you one and say, this is the one that you should purchase.
So one size don't fit all.
It does not.
And then I think one time I saw an article that said first thing to consider is the size of your hands.
Absolutely. What's going to fit you?
Well, that was kind of common sense. I hadn't thought about it from that perspective.
If I tried to buy a pair of size 8 shoes and I got a size 11 foot, it ain't going to work.
No.
And it's not going to work the same way with a handgun. If you've got a size 8 hand and you want a size 11 pistol, it's not going to work.
As a trainer, I've often heard this from firearms instructors that oftentimes it's easier to teach someone that had never had a handgun than it was to teach someone that's had a handgun and maybe shot 2 or 3 cases of ammo.
They have preconceived notions. The people that are not brand new gun owners or gun handlers, and they've got a bunch of bad habits, they are inherently harder to teach than the person who is an open book and a sponge that will absorb all the knowledge you're trying to give them.
If someone wants to reach you, they're watching this show and they say, well, how do I get up? I'd love to talk to Chad Thompson. Is there a way they can reach you? Are you open for people to call you either with questions, or if somebody says, well, I'd love to get him come talk to our civic group or what have you. Are you open to that kind of thing?
Oh, absolutely. They can go to my LinkedIn page. Now, LinkedIn, when it started, was a professional networking site. It was not social media. I will wholeheartedly admit in the last few years, LinkedIn is almost as bad as some of the social media sites.
Things are changing.
But it was professional at the time. And of course, I have the YouTube channel that I try to train people with, which is Chad Thompson Shooting on YouTube. They can hit me up on either one of those, my LinkedIn page, or go to YouTube and ask me a question on there. I checked it just about daily and I'll respond, but I'm certainly open to that kind of thing. I'm teaching in Wake Tech next Wednesday, the concealed carry instructor update and refresher. And I've got a bunch of other classes scheduled for that kind of thing. And so I'll be glad to help people out any way that I can.
And you're doing a lot of training with community colleges. So if they're in, for example, at James Sprunt, Wake Tech, Wilson Tech, you're doing a lot of classes, Johnston Community College. I've been following you. So when I look at all these, I mean, they could reach out to the community college and say, hey, you're going to have him here. I need to come by and see him a minute and ask him something. I mean, that would be.
We have that going on right now. Since the class at Wake filled as quickly as it did, we got just over 2,000 of concealed carry instructors in North Carolina, and I think Wake had only had room for 50 people. Since the class is overfilled already, we've got other community college school directors that are saying, let's bring it to Pitt County, let's bring it to Robson County, let's bring it out west, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, it's a self, I guess, recognized conclusion that you can never get enough training, you can never get too much understanding and knowledge when it comes to use of deadly force.
Never stop learning, because life never stops teaching.
And that, I guess, that quote was something that needs to be emblazed on your head when you go even thinking about purchasing a handgun.
Absolutely.
I want to thank you for being with us today and taking time to come in. And what folks probably don't understand is you actually took time out of the classroom to come and sit and have this conversation today. But I think it went well, Chad. Is there any little clue or anything? We've got about 10 seconds.
Safety is first, safety is central, and safety is last.
All about safety.
Yes, it is.
Thank you again for being with us. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for being with us today. We keep this process of trying to bring things to you that is both information and educational formatted. And I certainly hope today that you found that to be true as we talked about the use of deadly force. We look forward to seeing you again right here next week, and may God bless.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of We Should Know with host J.W. Simmons. If you have a question, comment, or suggestion regarding this or any episode, please send your emails to weshouldknowedu@gmail.com. And remember to tune in every Tuesday at 2:30 for another informative episode of We Should Know.